Right, we are on air live. It is Thursday, January 8th. We are having our first design meeting of 2015, which is super exciting. Backdrop release is right around the corner, so the kinds of stuff we're doing for design are going to be shifting here in a little bit because there isn't much more we can do to backdrop the product. So really quickly, Backdrop CMS, for those of you who don't know, is a content management system specifically intended for small to medium-sized businesses. Our short-term target audience is for people who currently have Drupal websites and are looking for a way to move forward with their current Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 projects and aren't interested in moving to Drupal 8. So this is kind of an alternative to that world. Long term, we're going to try and take Backdrop the project and shift it down market even further, not necessarily in terms of its features, but in terms of its user experience, in terms of its design. We want to appeal to people who are currently using WordPress and sites more like that and might be limited by what they offer. In order to do that, we've got to do a much better job with the experience of using the product. Drupal's had a long history of kind of falling short in terms of being friendly to designers and having bad experience. So the purpose of this meeting is to kind of focus on those two areas, try and get feedback from designers, hear from people in the community about what it is that they want, what things they're struggling with, and try and turn those into tangible, workable things that we can do for Backdrop. So in terms of what we're working on right now, we've got a list of tasks related to design that have been making progress. The first one is backdropcms.org, our primary website. Since our last meeting, we've added our logo, our logo mark, as well as the logo word. We've made some slight changes to the way the theme works to make it feel a little bit better, and that was just kind of in preparation for our product launch. We're going to be sending people to this website. We wanted to have a little bit more impression, a little more branding, so when people get there, they kind of get a feel for what Backdrop actually is. We've updated our fonts to match our brand guidelines and that sort of thing. So I think for the most part, the Backdrop CMS primary website is done. The designs we got from our designer have a mobile navigation in it that has not been implemented. I don't think we had any plans to do mobile navigation, but we have designs for it. So if we ever get time to do mobile navigation now, we can put that in and it'll look much better than it does currently. It's functional the way it is now. It's just not super fancy. So we have the ability to change that in the future, should we want to. So I think for our Backdrop primary website right now, I think we're kind of calling it good. We're obviously going to have to return to that in the future as we add new sections. We're going to be adding a section to browse modules and a section to browse themes. Those pages are going to need some design and user experience thought when they get built. But since we don't have modules or themes yet to browse, the design process there is on hold. As soon as we have some actual content, we'll be able to study that a little bit better and come up with some decent ways to get through it. So next on our list here is the API website. We have a design on backdropcms.org, the primary website. And what I was planning on doing is taking the design from the primary website and just putting it on the API website and then tweaking it as necessary. And I did that locally, and there was a bunch of stuff that didn't quite work that we just hadn't themed because it didn't exist on the primary website. The layout we have currently with the two sidebars, we've got one sidebar and then there's a drawer. That doesn't work on the API site because we don't have any subnavs, so we don't have anything that would pop open in the drawer. So I was thinking about just removing the drawer, leaving the sidebar, putting our navigation we have on the API site. There's a lot more links. Putting those into the sidebar that's styled the way it is on the main website takes up a little bit too much space. So what might be good is to the theme that's on the API site right now is something that Luke found on Drupal.org, and it's functional, but it's just not very pretty. And I have an open task for people who are now creating documentation for us on the API site who want it to look a little bit better with code blocks and that sort of thing. And so I don't want to put any work on this contributed theme that we got from Drupal, because it's currently running a Drupal site. It's about to be a Backdrop site. We're about to do a whole bunch of other changing around too. But we should find a way to make that documentation more legible in the short term. So I think what we should plan on doing, and I'll probably need some designer advice here, is just turning on the Backdrop primary website theme and thinking about how to handle that navigation in a way that's a little smoother. So I don't know if we want to open that up to feedback or what. But I think that's probably the easiest path forward and will give us less work to do in terms of when we port both Backdrop's primary website and Backdrop's API site to Backdrop, we'll only have one theme to port. We just need to think about how they work in the two different contexts, or how the one theme would work on the API site. Other things we're working on, we have Backdrop the product, obviously the most important thing right now. We have had an open issue for, I don't know, a year maybe to try and update the style guide for Backdrop. So this is just for our administration theme, all of the basic elements, like what does a drop button look like? What does a form element look like? We've had several different people offer to work on it. We have a couple of people thinking about it right now. Darius, our designer who did the design for the Backdrop CMS main website, has done a lot of thought about how to improve the current administration interface. We have a new design for drop buttons. We have a new design for submit buttons. We have new designs for tabs. We have new designs for the heading area. But there's a bunch of stuff in the style guide that hasn't yet been thought about. So I asked him last night if he would take a look specifically at status messages and breadcrumbs. And I think depending on what we get back, some of these changes we might be able to implement. I know we also have Ronnie Norwood. He offered to work on something yesterday. He's looking at it. I think we should check in with him and see what he's come up with. But we've got less than a week now. Backdrop should be released a week from today. Sorry, a week from yesterday. A week from today. So I think the amount of changes we're actually going to be able to get in are very minimal. I think if it's something like changing the style on a drop button, that would be possible. If it's something like, I don't know, coming up with new layouts for like the modules page, that's definitely not going to happen in the next week. So getting something, I think for me, the biggest thing is the messages. The messages when they display very much like, I don't know, 2001. It feels like 2001 messages, and they look exactly like Drupal 7's messages. Getting those fixed, I think, would be high on my priority list, and it might not be something that would be hard to implement in the next 6 days. But trying to figure out how to keep the whole thing kind of cohesive is also kind of important, and changing things one piece at a time sometimes doesn't achieve that goal. So Nate, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that at all.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. Like, we don't have time to make a whole lot of changes at this point. So, I mean, well, we don't need to restrict ourselves too much. I mean, we don't have a lot of time for the 1.0.0 release, which is of course in a week. So I think our best strategy is to move forward with like modest improvements to the style guide, and then look to implement them in a minor point release.
Okay. I think that sounds good too. If we can get the designs done sooner, that's good, and then we can spend some time implementing them. And they might not be in 1.0.0, but hopefully we can get it in pretty soon afterwards. So I'm not imagining a ton of people will run out and install Backdrop and start running it right when we release. I have a feeling we're going to have a period of time where a whole bunch of people are trying it. And the number of people who are trying it will probably increase over time. Also, we hope. So in terms of making that first impression, we'll be making the wrong first impression to a very small amount of people. But the sooner we get style guide changes in, we'll be making the right first impression to a larger amount of people. So I think it's fine if we don't get it in right away. But I'm slightly saddened. But that's okay. As long as we get the designs and we get a really good product in the end, that's really what's most important. So anyway, yes, designs are underway. We've got a whole bunch of people working on it right now, which is great. We just need to be careful about what we actually try and change before 1.0.0 so we don't break anything. Other things on our agenda, a little bit more exciting and farther off into the future. One thing I would really love is if we could get a new front-end theme into core. Right now, we have Bartik. Drupal's had Bartik for the last like 5 years. It's great, but nobody uses it when they actually launch a site. It would be good if we could get a front-end theme in there that's actually usable. Maybe something minimal like Bootstrap-esque that people would feel like they could actually have a professional website that looks like that, even if there's no style associated with it. I think that would be a really great starting point so that someone could launch a website without needing to write a custom theme. So if we have anyone who's particularly interested in creating a theme for Backdrop that would be of caliber to go into core, the process for that would be created as a contrib theme. We'll all try it out and use it and look at it. We'll do code reviews, and then at some point we'll decide if it's good enough it can go into core. So obviously if you're working on themes for Backdrop anyway, keep that in the back of your mind, like, is this something you think should be submitted? Let us know. Create an issue if you have something you're interested in, and we can talk about it. Right now there aren't any contenders. I'm hoping we'll have a couple, but we don't want a whole bunch of people do a whole bunch of work that ends up not getting used. So definitely let us know if you're thinking about working on that. So other things we're working on, there's a tag in our GitHub issue queue for issues that need designer feedback or design. Some of them are just like, hey, look at this thing we've done, make sure it's not ugly. And some of them are, I have no idea how to deal with this problem. And we need actual designs. And right now that list is fairly short, but as things progress forward in Backdrop, we'll be trying to add those labels to any issue that comes up that needs design feedback. So if we have people who want to get involved but aren't necessarily coders, we need your experience as well as your design files. And we're going to try and make it easy for you to get involved using that tag. So keep an eye on that in the future. We also have a similar tag. Well, I guess it's not actually a tag. We have a similar set of issues on GitHub for user experience, and these aren't necessarily things that need designer feedback, although that will be a part of most of these issues, but just things that if you are new to using Backdrop and you can't figure out how to do something, or you find something particularly frustrating, or your instincts are telling you to do one thing, but when you do it, you find that that's not the right answer and it was something else. We're trying to create the general experience of using Backdrop to make it a little bit better than Drupal's, and we need feedback for that. We need people to identify the issues that need work and also come up with solutions for them. Then we also need designers to design things that sometimes, and coders to code things. In Drupal, user experience has always kind of been an afterthought. In Backdrop, we'd like to kind of make it a forethought. We know we're starting with Drupal, so we've got a lot of work to do, but we are kind of going through the process of looking at certain things in Backdrop and saying, is this a user experience problem? Is this something that could be a user experience improvement? And tagging them as such in the queue. We aren't using a GitHub tag for that. Instead, we're using, in the actual issue title, we're using square brackets and then the letters U and X. So there's a link in the agenda for today to do that, but you can also just search the issue queue for anything with UX in square brackets, and you'll find a set of user experience issues. Right now, I think there's also a fairly small subset of those. There's some big doozies about like changing names of things, which always creates bike shed on Drupal. We've changed the names of some things in Backdrop. We've talked about changing the names of other things. I think getting those sorted out would be good. There's also some bigger problems that aren't just labels, but things like how do you design a user interface for dragging and dropping blocks, right? We have a kind of a cruddy interface in there now that is perfect in terms of how it works, but I don't think anyone's going to be able to figure out how to use it just by poking at it. And we have Bojan working on new designs for that, which will be implemented sometime in the near future. But it would be good to have that same kind of process involved for everything we build, where the first thing is just to get it done, right? Get it done, get it in, get it working. But then the second thing is to think about, like, how do people actually interact with this tool? And in order to achieve those goals on a bigger scale, we've also come up with this idea of setting up human interface guidelines. And there's a little bit about this in our agenda under the overview section down at the bottom, where it would be great if we could come up in Backdrop land with patterns that humans have when they interact with the software, and then tools that we give them in order to handle those interactions. So things like, when do you use a drop button? When do you use autocomplete field? So that as people are using the software, they get trained in a way that's consistent. Like, oh, if it's this kind of thing, I interact with it this way, and all of the interfaces will behave in the same way. In Drupal right now, it's everyone who creates a module creates their own interface patterns, and there isn't a lot of cohesiveness across even all of core, especially not all of contrib. And it would be great if we could get that sorted out. So Gutem's been working on coming up with this human interface guidelines document. It's based on, I think, some work that Apple's done about how they wanted people to interact with their hardware as well as software. We're going to try and do something really similar here for Backdrop. We've got a GitHub repo. It could use some work. If anyone wants to take a look at what he's done already, we can definitely get you involved in reviewing stuff, creating new pages, just to kind of help get that document going, which I think is a really great idea. So in terms of our timeline, we don't really have anything that's super urgent. The most urgent thing we had was to get our logo on our website last time we met, and that's done. Or we actually have some branding now on our primary flagship site, which is great. The next thing, obviously, is the style guide. Darius is going to have a second round of feedback for us tonight. We'll check in with Ronnie tonight. We'll see if we can get those two sets of feedback ready for some way to put something into core, depending on how minor that is. We'll see what designs we end up with. And then beyond that, we'll need to take those designs and actually put them on Backdrop longer term. Like if we aren't getting in for 1.x, we'll get it in shortly after. And then beyond that, we don't really have any other deadlines. It would just be a matter of working through everything else that we've got in the pipelines. Like, do we have anyone working on a new front-end theme? Do we have improvements to make to the admin theme? Do we have issues that need attention? And those will go in as they get done. So if we get them done for a certain release of Backdrop, they'll be in that release of Backdrop, but we won't. I don't know that we have anything right now that needs to be scheduled. If we have some huge glaring problem, we might schedule something just so that it can get some more focus, but it's not the plan as of now. Only other thing on the agenda, which I'm not sure we need to talk about this every week, was setting up brand guidelines for Backdrop. I did notice that the font we have listed here, and this is for Backdrop CMS, the primary website, not necessarily Backdrop the product. This is not the correct font. The Open Sans font we are going to be using on the product, but our actual brand font, do you remember what it's called? I think it was
Source Sans Pro.
Source Sans Pro. So I'll update that link. And I also think it would be useful if we could create a page for our brand guidelines. I know Drupal.org has a nice one. I've had a couple of times where I've wanted to send someone who's working on something to our color palette, and the only place that we have it was in these agendas, or I'd have to email them the image that I put into these agendas. I don't know where that fits in the scope of all of the other pages that we have on our sites, because we don't have a lot. And I think I looked at it and looked at putting on the primary website and ended up feeling like it wasn't a great fit for there right now.
Right.
But maybe long term we can figure out how we can post this information so it's a little easier for people to find.
Yeah, we'll need to think about where that belongs.
Okay, well that's all I had for this meeting. It's our first meeting of 2015, which is pretty exciting, but it was a short one. If we have anyone who has any particular design experience or wants to get involved in design stuff, this is an area where Drupal has a history of not being particularly good at it. We want to try and change that, so we're open to feedback on how we can make things more accessible to designers and how we can make things better. We've already started with a couple of issue tags. I think we need some, maybe some more documentation might be useful as to how to get involved and where to go and what to do. But yeah, definitely give us more feedback, and we're interested in hearing from you. Is there anything else you want to add, Nate?
No, I don't think so. We've got another meeting in 25 minutes, so we'll see some people then.
All right, that's a wrap. Bye, everybody.
All right, bye, guys.